Car makers, investors, politicians, they all have one thing in common: they're taking advantage of the current automotive electrification to achieve their goals, whether it's about establishing a better position on the market or it's just about earning as much money as possible. They often use all kinds of illegal means. Some of them remain under the surface and some get discovered, and in this video we're focusing on the latter. We present to you the 5 biggest EV scandals that are forcing the EV market to collapse. Number 5. Electrify America scand. It's been almost a decade since Dieselgate, which is still one of the biggest scandals in automotive history. Volkswagen was charged with installing software on its diesel-powered cars to cheat on eBay emissions tests. Eventually, it turned out that emissions are actually 40 times higher than permitted. That scandal cost the German car maker billions so far. Besides paying huge amounts of money, the company also agreed to make amends and build a whole new network of public chargers for electric cars, today known as Electrify America. The total investment of $2 billion was one of the ways to compensate for all that air pollution. Today, Electrify America has over 4,000 chargers across America, but things didn't turn out so well, at least not as expected. It turns out that the idea to compensate for Dieselgate was just an overture for another scandal. It may not be as big as Dieselgate, but it definitely contributes to EV meltdown, namely the latest reports from J.D. Power ranked Electrify America last in consumer satisfaction among fast-charging networks. Another study focused on the San Francisco Bay Area showed that only 72.5% of fast chargers were operative. J.D. Power estimates that every fifth charging attempt is unsuccessful for numerous reasons: broken screens, faulty payment systems, broken cords, or excessively low charging are just some of them. With more and more Americans buying EVs over the last few years, consumers have also become aware of all the inconvenience that comes with electric cars, something that you usually don't hear from those who advertise EVs. So it doesn't surprise that some sources estimate that 18% of those who buy electric vehicles eventually return to gas-powered cars. Charging inconvenience is one of the key reasons, and the poor performance of Electrify America charging stations is certainly contributing a lot to the current EV market slowdown. Number 4. Tesla's secret complaint team. Without any doubt, Tesla is the most advanced EV manufacturer in the world, probably the only company that makes EVs that actually work, but even these vehicles are not as great as the company advertises them, and that particularly refers to the max range, namely most Tesla models are characterized by impressive autonomy with claimed ranges that go way over 300, sometimes 400 miles. In reality, things are a little bit different, and in most cases that number drops significantly due to the batteries vulnerability to factors like driving style, weather conditions, etc. Even such exaggerating wouldn't be much of a problem given all the battery issues. Customers are familiar with the problem occurred when Tesla owners started suspecting that the company uses rigged software with unrealistic range projections. It turned out that Tesla cars indeed use algorithms that show rosy distance projections. Once the battery falls below 50%, the software suddenly starts showing way more realistic projections, with range figures decreasing rapidly in front of drivers' eyes. The only mitigating circumstance is that Teslas are designed with a so-called safety buffer with around 15 miles of additional range after empty battery readouts, with a significantly lower range than advertised. It wasn't a surprise to see many owners tried to book their visits to dealers, but Tesla figured out how to reduce these visits by sending a message that says that remote diagnostics has determined that the battery was fine. Eventually, we found out that Tesla employees were instructed to thwart all complaints about the range. As the number of complaints were getting bigger, Tesla eventually created a diversion team that would work on these cancellations all day long, with hundreds of cancellations on a weekly basis. Things went so far that Tesla was tracking the number of cancellations of each employee. Neither Tesla nor Musk responded to these accusations. Number 3. Remember Dash for diesel. Older generations probably remember the former UK Chancellor Gordon Brown and his tax system that was favoring diesel cars more than 2 decades ago. Diesel engines indeed have lower carbon emissions than gasoline cars, but what officials were missing to say is that the emissions of nitrogen oxides, particulates, and other pollutants were much greater, and we're talking about things that are far more dangerous for human health. Sounds familiar? That's exactly what politicians from different parts of the world are doing right now, with the only difference that this time it's about electric cars. Rather than diesel, EVs are advertised as zero-emission sustainable vehicles. They're advertised as something that will save the planet, and for that cause they're spending billions of tax money on all kinds of EV incentives. Once again, they're missing to point out the negative sides of electric vehicles, and there are so many of them. They're missing to say that electric vehicles are not the answer for many people. First of all, there are practical reasons like charging and ownership cost. Moreover, EVs are also more dangerous than gas-powered cars as they're heavier and therefore are more likely to kill or hurt more occupants of other vehicles in traffic accidents. And if we consider who's buying EVs, as well as that 90% of owners also have a gas-powered car that is used for long trips, it's obvious that EVs won't save the environment. Instead, the recent estimation suggests that even in 2050, EVs will make up no more than 20% of global car travel. According to the UN Climate Panel, that'll be enough to reduce global temperatures by no more than 110,000 of a Celsius degree by the end of the century. Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency found that hybrid cars emit the same amount of CO2 as EVs over their lifetime, which is quite interesting if we consider that hybrids are much cheaper and don't have most of the EV downsides, especially when it comes to charging. In other words, politicians are missing to say that the benefits of electric cars are minimal, while the downsides are numerous. Meanwhile, they're hesitating to deal with much bigger emitters of CO2 such as electricity production, agriculture, industry, etc. To remind you, passenger cars account for just 7% of global emissions. Number 2. Nikola fraud. Although based on a slightly different, but essentially the same technology, the company called Nika and its founder Trevor Milton are a perfect example of how things work in the EV world. We won't say that the whole automotive electrification is built on the ocean of lies, but it's pretty clear that many of its aspects are nothing more than wishful thinking of various pioneers, officials, and politicians. The reality is different and clearly shows a massive gap between promises and execution. As mentioned, this scandal is a perfect example as it refers to a story that started a decade ago when Milton founded a startup company in his basement. The idea was to make a hydrogen fuel cell heavy-duty truck, an electric vehicle that would use hydrogen instead of batteries to store energy. 2 years later, we already saw a prototype called the Neo 1, with Milton claiming it was a pickup capable of operating on its own, rather than being just a pusher concept truck. Eventually, it turned out that this concept, as well as many other projects and technological achievements, were a lie. Milton ended up accused of numerous false and misleading statements. Sting from the statement that one of his pickups, the Badger, was built from the ground up and used Nikola's parts and technology. Then there were misleading silhouette GM Mission GM has been considered a stumbling giant for decades, and it is one of the best candidates because GM has been investing a lot in the last few years and seems quite committed to the all-electric future. But things don't go as planned. The company is losing billions on new EV investments due to the inability to gain new technologies properly and adapt to production. All the profit that's coming from pickups and other gassed vehicles is used to cover massive EV losses. In such a set of circumstances where shareholders are very unhappy with the current expected earnings, it doesn't surprise that the share price has been depressing a lot recently. GM officials decided for the most logical move to buy back shares worth $10 billion, which is a quarter of the company's entire value. Investors are perfectly aware that in a situation where the company is blindly following government requirements related to massive electrification, GM will continue losing billions on electric vehicles. Because traditional GM customers are among more conservative ones and don't want EVs, GM must rely on gasoline-powered profits as long as possible and forget about the whole idea of producing over 1 million EVs annually by the end of this decade. If that doesn't happen, both the company and shareholders could expect nothing but bad things. Thanks for watching and see you next time.